But our boomers, America's boomers, did one thing different. They had kids. And say what you will about the American millennial generation, and there's so much we can say about the American millennial generation. They've got one thing going for them that most of their cohorts around the world don't. They exist, and they're providing consumption to the system now, and they will be providing investment in the future. They will save us all. Let me give you an idea of just how lopsided everything is and the scale of the challenge that's just around the corner. What I've done here is I've stacked up all of the GDPs for all of the consumption-led economies in the world. US, of course, is the biggest one in the game. Here's where we are as of the data from last year, and here's where we'll be in 10 years. We have a significant drop-off in what is potential global consumption. But here are the export-led systems. They age out. They almost disappear as a class. And so if you are selling food products to an export-led system and the export-led system all of a sudden no longer has income, you got to wonder how stable that market's going to be. Right now, we only have one post-growth system in the world. That's Japan. But 10 years from now, we have always known that the first half of the 2020s was going to be a consumption crash. Global consumption has already peaked. But global production and capital supplies are in the process of peaking right now as well. Global consumption, global production, global capital, doesn't matter which one you're looking at, none of them will recover in our lifetimes. And that was before coronavirus came along and sucker punched everyone. What we've got here is new cases of coronavirus on a 7-day moving average in per capita terms, so it's broadly comparable country to country. Anything that is above that double red arrow is at 5 per 100,000 per day. That's the level where epidemiologists say that you're not going to be able to root COVID out of your society without a mass vaccination program. The 6 countries on here are the world's 6 largest consumption-led economies. Now, for the advanced countries here, the UK, the US, and France, we know that we're probably undercounting our COVID cases by a factor of about 3. So, we're not just above that double red line, we're way above it. But we also know that the 3 developing countries on this, India, Mexico, and Brazil, are probably undercounting by a factor of 10, or in the case of India, probably undercounting by a factor of 30. India kind of stopped testing altogether. They think that they got herd immunity. That's not as good as it sounds. We'll get to that in a minute. But what this tells me is with the consumption-led economies of the world currently offline, it doesn't really matter what's going on in anything else, because if you're not consuming, you're not growing. If you're an export-led system, you really don't have anyone to sell to. So by the time the world bounces back from this, which isn't going to be this year for the world writ large, it's already too late. We're already in 2022. So folks, this is it. It's over. Most countries will never recover to the growth profile or the economic status that they had of January of last year. This is as good as it gets. Actually going to be quite a bit worse because coronavirus has evolved. We have a number of new variants that are coming out. The first one is out of the United Kingdom. The problem with that one is it's 50 to 70% more communicable. So I strongly suggest people stick with those masks no matter what your governor says, at least for the time being. Now, the coronavirus variant, this UK one, is likely to become the dominant strain in the United States within the next 2 to 3 weeks. It's already responsible for something like 70% of new cases. So it is coming very, very, very quickly. That's problem one. Problem two is the nature of the coronavirus vaccines, with one exception. Every coronavirus vaccine that is in circulation in the world right now, doesn't matter who makes it, it's a 2-shot formula. And everyone's prioritizing their older populations. Older populations around the world have problems with transport, with problems with finance, problems with dementia, and the chances of people missing that second shot are reasonable. It's not going to be the majority of folks, but it's going to happen a lot. And if you want to generate more mutations, you partially immunize someone. So we know that these variants we have, this is just the start. We're going to have more. Problem three is the South African variant. In addition to being slightly more lethal, it is cross-communicable with rodents. And there are mice and rats in every city in the world. What that tells me is that coronavirus is no longer something we can get rid of. It will be with us forever, which means that we will all need to get booster shots forever. But the biggest problem I see in the short and midterm is the Brazilian variant. Now, in the Amazonian city of Manaus has a population between 2 and 3 million. It was one of the first cities to really get hit hard by the virus last year. Best guess is that by the end of our summer last year, some 3/4 of the population of the city had suffered COVID. Hospitals overflowed in stories that we've become a little inured to at this point. But then they achieved herd immunity and cases plummeted. But starting about a month ago, the hospitals started filling up again. It appears that the new Brazilian variant, at least in part, can bypass pre-existing naturally gained immunity. And that makes vaccination absolutely critical, because the immune response that your body generates from a vaccination is about 10 times as powerful as what you get from the natural gain process. So if you can get the vaccination, you're going to be safe versus this variant. But if you can't, it doesn't matter if you've had COVID before. So any country that cannot achieve mass vaccination by July is going to be facing a new wave of COVID that's at least as bad as the first. That's the entire developing world. That's all of Europe except for the United Kingdom. You add in the increased communicability, the reservoir species capabilities, and East Asia is going to have to face a new wave of this as well. And if you're a country that adopted or even achieved a herd immunity strategy, Brazil, India, Sweden, you now have to do it all over again. Now, for the United States, this is nearly in our rearview mirror. We'll talk about the vaccines here in just a second. But globally, this means we're not even halfway through the coronavirus crisis. Most of the developing world can't even begin vaccinations until next year. You add in the simultaneous demographic collapse of globalization, and the picture for anyone not in North America is fundamentally bleak. I'd like to introduce you to William Shakespeare. Like, that's literally the dude's name, Willie Shakespeare. He's a British citizen. He was the second person in the UK to get the vaccine. The Brits have a way with PR. Now, there's not a lot of good news here, but there's a lot of great news. So, I'm going to take this for what it is. We've got 5 vaccines, the first 2 of which, Pfizer and Moderna, are the mRNA formulas. They are both in circulation in the United States already. We've got 3 others at various stage of approval and use. Of them, the AstraZeneca is a British one, very popular in the UK right now, starting to make the rounds in Europe. They haven't yet applied for approval in the United States. The Novavax one is likely to be the one that's most popular in Canada. They're trying to figure out manufacturing right now. It also has not applied for approval in the United States. And then the Johnson & Johnson one is a new one as of last week that has just started flowing into the United States. Now, there are a lot of differences of all of these, but there's a couple things to keep in mind. First, Pfizer and Moderna are mRNA formulas, and both of them require a freezer for distribution. And we're now to the point that like a normal commercial grade freezer works. They don't need dry ice anymore. Those are our primary vectors in the US. AstraZeneca in Europe, Novavax in Canada. Johnson & Johnson stands out from all of the others in that it only needs 1 shot. So once and done, can be stored in a refrigerator. So moving forward in the months to come, the J&J formula will be instrumental in breaking the back of coronavirus around the world, but they have to generate a couple of billion doses before we get to that point. Now, whenever you are presented with the option, you should take whichever one you can get.